Hello, Year 11. We're going to do a bit of revision today on English Language Paper 1 for AQA, ready to be ready for your exam tomorrow. A quick thing, hi Charlie, a quick thing I just want to say is if you do not have the paper, this won't work for you. So if you don't have the paper, you need to go to my Twitter channel, which is Lindsay J Skinner, LINDSAY J Skinner. And then you need to download the paper, because I'm going to talk through a specific paper, and there's no point of you doing this if you don't have that paper. So that's the first thing. So you need to get that paper in front of you, and it's going to be looking at a text called Cuckoo's Calling, which is by Robert Galbraith. Now, for those of you who are interested, that actually is J.K. Rowling. She has written under that name as well when she's done adult fiction. So first of all, you need to have that in front of you, and what we're going to do first is simply read it. So before you jump into actually answering the questions, I just want to chat with you about what the exam's actually going to entail. So it's going to be an hour and 45 minutes long. 1 hour and 45 minutes. That means that you need to get your timings right, because it's really, really common as an examiner for me to see that students have done really well in the first, say, 3 or 4 questions, and then they've run out of time, and then they've rushed a question. Now, the problem with that is that the final question, question 5, is worth 40 marks. That's half of the marks on the paper. So if you screw it up, then you've lost essentially half your marks, or certainly jeopardised half your marks. For those of you who want the link to the paper, you need to go to my Twitter, because I have tweeted the link. That's the place to get it. It's a Dropbox link. Someone might be able to share it on the comments, the link, but I now can't. Basically, I'm not good enough at YouTube to be able to do that, so sorry about that. So you've got an hour and 3/4, so what's that, 105 minutes, and you can, if you wish, do the questions in a different order than 1 to 5. So some people recommend that you do question 5 first, and that's okay if you're really confident with your creative writing. The only problem with that is that some students find it useful to take ideas, or indeed language from the extract. Well, you can only do that if you've read the extract first. So it's up to you what order you do them in. And my students will probably do it in the order 1 to 5, but they're going to be really strict about their timing. So they're going to spend 5 minutes on question 1, just slightly under that actually, between 12 and 15 minutes on question 2, between 12 and 15 minutes on question 3, and then 25 to 30 minutes on question 4, and then the full 45 minutes on the writing section. So we're going to look at the extract now. So hopefully you've got the extract in front of you. And what I would say is my best advice for the first bit is that you need to go in, note down what times you're going to change the question. So as soon as it starts, have a little think, right, when do I need to finish this question? When do I need to finish this question? So that you've got a really, really clear sense of when you're moving on. That's the first thing. The second thing, you need to read the extract, and you need to note in the margin what the focus is of each paragraph. This will help you much later when you get to your structure question, and when you're doing your question 4 as well. It will be helpful to know what's happening in each paragraph. Let's look at the extract first, and I'm going to read it to you, and then we're just going to think about what happens in each of the sections. So the extract comes from a detective novel, Cuckoo's Calling by Robert Galbraith. This is the beginning of the novel, which describes a street where a crime is being investigated after the death of a young female celebrity. Okay. The buzz in the street was like the humming of flies. Photographers stood massed behind the barriers, patrolled by police, their long-snouted cameras poised, their breath rising like steam. Snow fell steadily onto hats and shoulders, gloved fingers wiped lenses clear. From time to time, there came outbreaks of desultory clicking as the watchers filled the waiting time by snapping the white canvas tent in the middle of the road, the entrance to the tall red brick apartment block behind it, and the balcony on the top floor from which the body had fallen. So, first thing, it's describing a street that is full of people. And that would be literally all I would write in the margin. Street full of people, but I would probably also write crime scene, because clearly there's a white tent, there are police, there's people trying to take photographs, and the final bit talks about a body falling. So the reason it would be considered, I guess, a crime scene is because, it might be that they've jumped, which I guess wouldn't make it a crime, but it also could be that they've pushed, so the body's fallen from, so they investigate it, and therefore it's a crime scene. So next to that first paragraph, you just need to note what the focus is. So the focus is actually the setting, and the setting is a street where a crime's taken place. Okay, let's move on to the second paragraph. Behind the tightly packed paparazzi stood white vans with enormous satellite dishes on the roofs, and journalists talking, some in foreign languages, while sand men in headphones hovered. Between recordings, the reporters stamped their feet and warmed their hands on hot beakers of coffee from the teeming cafe a few streets away. To fill the time, the woolly-hatted cameraman filmed the backs of the photographers, the balcony, the tent concealing the body, then repositioned themselves for wide shots that encompassed the chaos that exploded inside the sedate and snowy Mayfair Street, with its lines of glossy black doors framed by white stone, something I can't even say, porticos, and flanked by topiary shrubs. The entrance to number 18 was bounded with tape. Police officials, some of them white-clothed forensic experts, could be glimpsed in the hallway beyond. Right, so for the second paragraph, simply you need to note in what the key focus is. So the key focus is clearly the people in the scene and all of the things that they're doing. Notice we don't actually get introduced to any specific characters. We don't get the name of any character. We don't get the description of any character. So currently, J.K. Rowling or Robert Galbraith is focusing on specifically developing the atmosphere of the scene. We've got the description of the place, and then later on, obviously, we've got the description of the people in the place, but no real sense of character yet. The television stations had already had the news for several hours. Members of the public were crowding at either end of the road, held at bay by more police. Some had come on purpose to look. Others had paused on their way to work. Many held mobile telephones aloft to take pictures before moving on. One young man, not knowing which was the crucial balcony, photographed each of them in turn, even though the middle one was packed with a row of shrubs, 3 neat leafy orbs which barely left room for a human being. So, that third paragraph is again focusing on the people and the setting. And I guess really the important thing is the idea that people have come to look. So they're taking photographs, and we've got this guy who's taking photographs of every single balcony. So on the side, you need to put there that there's still a focus on the people there and the setting, but people are taking photographs would be the key thing. Next paragraph, paragraph 4. A group of young girls had bought flowers which were and were filmed handing them to the police, who had not yet decided on a place for them, but laid them self-consciously on the back of the police van, aware of the camera lenses following their every move. So again, you might want to just briefly note in the margin what is happening in that paragraph. So young girls and flowers, and police and cameramen. Correspondence sent by 24-hour news channels kept up a steady stream of comment and speculation around the few sensational facts they knew. So again, news, that's all you need to focus. No sign yet that they're moving the body, which has led some to speculate. No words on whether she was alone when she fell. Teams have entered the building and will be conducting a thorough search. So you'd literally write speech, news. A chilly light, this is the final paragraph. A chilly light filled the interior of the tent. 2 men were crouching beside the body, ready to move it at last into a body bag. Her head had bled a little into the snow. The face was crushed and swollen, one eye reduced to a pucker, the other showing as a silver of dull white between distended lids. When the sequin top she wore glittered in slight changes of light, it gave a disquieting impression of movement, as though she breathed again. All was tensing muscles, ready to rise. The snow fell with soft fingertip plunks onto the canvas overhead. So finally, all this way into the text, we get a description of the body, which is, of course, what everyone wants to see. And I think immediately as an impression, and it might be worth just noting your initial impressions, I felt like, wow, there's all this excitement and people wanting to see and people taking photographs and chit-chattering and waiting to hear news. And there seems to be like this almost excited, celebratory feeling. And then Galbraith contrasts that with this kind of really serious depiction of the body. Okay, once you have done the reading and you've annotated on the side the key things that are happening in each one, you need to look at the questions. So question 1 is pretty straightforward. Question 1 will ask you to list 4 things. it will always ask you to list 4 things. And the key things you need to remember about listing 4 things is, number 1, they just want, in this question, explicit information. And what that means is it's obvious. It should be blindingly obvious what is in the text. They don't want you to read between the lines. They don't want you to think hard and make inferences. They simply want you to pick information that is very clear. That's the first thing. The second thing that you need to remember is you should write in little simple sentences. You can absolutely quote from the text, but you need to write in little simple sentences just so that it's really clear what you're saying. And then finally, you don't want to try and repeat anything that you've written. So question 1 for this one, and I'll just give you a few minutes to do it and we'll talk it through. Read the first paragraph again. List 4 things we learn about the street. So actually in the real one, you will get line references, but it's a total pain in the arse doing line references on a Word document as it turns out. So instead of doing that, I've just done the first paragraph, but that makes it the first 6 lines. So 4 things you learn about the street. I want you to have a go at doing it now as I read the extract, and then we'll talk about the kind of things that might come up. The buzz in the street was like the humming of flies. Photographers stood massed behind barriers patrolled by police, their long-snouted cameras poised, their breath rising like steam. Snow fell steadily onto the hats and shoulders, gloved fingers, wiped lenses clear. From time to time, there came outbreaks of desultory clicking as the watchers filled the waiting time by snapping the white canvas tent in the middle of the road, the entrance to the tall red brick apartment block behind it, and the balcony on the top floor from which the body had fallen. So you need to be picking 4 bits of information about the street. So you don't really want to talk about anything else other than the street. Okay, so the kind of things that you could get credit for. Number 1, that there's a buzz in the street, and you might even literally write out the first sentence. The buzz in the street was like the humming of flies, but even there was a buzz in the street would be fine. You might say there are photographers in the street. That would be okay. You might also say that there are barriers that are patrolled by the police. Now, if you separated there are barriers and they are patrolled by the police, you probably wouldn't get both marks because they naturally go together as one chunk of information. There are barriers patrolled by police. You would also get marks for the fact that it's snowing. It's snowing in the street. You might not get marks for the fact that it's cold. And the reason why is because that's an inference, because it doesn't say that it's cold. It says that snow fell, so you know it's snowing on the street. That's really clear bit of explicit information. But actually it's implicit that it's cold because you know that from the fact that they've got steamy breath and the fact that it's snowing and the fact they've got gloves on. But it doesn't specifically say that, and so you don't want to make an inference. You want to just go for the really obvious things. So we've got that there's a humming in the street, that there are photographers, that there are barriers patrolled by the police. We've got that the snow is falling. There's obviously a canvas tent in the middle of the road. That's a really obvious one. So they're the kind of things that you might want to do for question 1. That shouldn't take you very long, and I would imagine that by the time you've finished reading and annotating your text, and you finished question 1, you'll be about 10 minutes into your exam. Okay, we're then going to move on to question 2. Question 2, you get marks for 3 different things. The first thing that you get marks for is subject terminology. That is accurately labelling things like adjectives, nouns, verbs. If you want to be smart about it and use sophisticated terminology, you might use present or past participle if you know that. If you don't know it, don't use it, because it's better that you use simple terminology accurately than it is that you try to be more ambitious and do something wrong. Yeah, guys, just as an aside, you can close the chat on here, so you don't have to read the comments that people are writing. So if you don't want to read it, just close the chat and you don't need to worry about it. You can just watch this and look at your paper. Okay, so in question 2, the subject terminology, you can equally get marks, not just for the word classes like adjective, noun, verbs, etc., but for any kind of language techniques. So that might be simile, metaphor, personification, but don't talk about structure. So subject terminology first thing. The next one is textual detail. So textual detail is any quotation, but it's worth noting that it says detail. So I would click. I would pick like individual words, so like I don't know, tightly in this one, or trying to read other ones, people hovering or stamping, those kind of words. So I would pick out the individual words rather than anything else. So first you get marks for subject terminology, second you get marks for the textual detail, and third you get marks for the effect, and I'll talk about the effect in just a moment. So first of all, let's read the question. It says, how does the writer use language here to describe the people in the street? So we're no longer focusing on the street, so don't write about anything else on the street apart from the people. And then it says you can include the writer's choice of words and phrases, language features, and sentence forms. If I'm honest, I would avoid sentence forms. Knock yourself out if you feel confident with that, but my group, I would really much rather you focus on individual words and cumulative effect of language, because I think if you stray into sentence forms, you might end up writing about sentence structures, which could then lead you to writing about structure rather than sentence forms, which would be declarative, interrogative, imperative, and declarative, interrogative, exclamatory. So I probably would just focus on words and devices if I was you. Right, so we're looking at the people in the street. So we're going to read the section now and underline the individual words or any techniques that we might want to look at. So, behind the tightly packed paparazzi. So, firstly, you might want to look at the word tightly, or indeed the word packed, or indeed those two words together, because they're clearly crushed in, so the people are pushed in together. So you might want to look at each one of those. And as you're reading, you should be labelling the subject terminology. So tightly is an adverb, packed is a verb, and then we've got paparazzi. That's also a nice one to use, and that's a noun. So behind the tightly packed paparazzi stood white vans with enormous satellite dishes on the roofs, and journalists talking, some in foreign languages. So you might look at the word foreign, which is an adjective, and you might talk about the fact that clearly this is a really big event and it's an important event, and they've travelled because obviously this celebrity, whoever's died, is important, and that in itself shows it's a big news story, an important news story, those kind of things. While sound men in headphones hovered. So again, hovered, there's that verb there, it is kind of casual, it implies that they're waiting around. Between recordings, the reporters stamped their feet and warmed their hands on hot beakers of coffee from the teeming cafe a few streets away. So you might talk about stamped, the energy that's there, the sense that they're really cold, etc., etc. It creates a sense of movement. There's certainly no grief there particularly. To fill the time, the woolly-hatted is a lovely compound word there. So you'd probably use, it's actually a past participle in that, the hatted. But you could talk about the word woolly and talk about it as an adjective. It implies that they're cold, etc., etc. There's a casualness as well about having a woolly hat. To fill the time, the woolly-hatted cameraman filmed the backs of the photographers, the balcony, the tent concealing the body, then repositioned themselves for wide shots that encompassed the chaos that had exploded inside the sedate and snowy Mayfair Street, with its lines of glossy black doors framed by white stone porticos. I'll read it in all A's, I'm going to look it up, and flanked by topiary shrubs. If you don't know what something is, don't worry about it, just skip over it. It's very rare that you really would need to know the meaning of every single word. The entrance to number 18 was bounded with tape. Police officials, and so you might want to talk about the word police and all of the connotations that you have with that, the law enforcement, authority, uniform, investigating. There's a moral link to the police, obviously, and a power and authority. And again, the word officials that comes with that, and so you might talk about that. Police officials, some of them white-clothed forensic experts, and again, you might want to talk about the word expert, could be glimpsed in the hallway beyond. So you need to write 3 paragraphs for this, ideally about 3 paragraphs. Now, what I would do is I would pick a word. So I'm going to pick paparazzi, and I would say the writer uses the noun paparazzi to describe some of the people on the street. And immediately what I've done is I've got myself a mark for noun, and I've also got myself some credit for this textual detail with paparazzi. So immediately I've got credit. Then I'll just go in with the connotations. So the connotations are what that word I associate with it. So I associate the word paparazzi, so I would continue. I'd say the writer uses the noun paparazzi to indicate that the people in the street work for the press, that they are there because it is an interesting story. The word paparazzi implies aggressive and persistent people who are taking lots and lots of photographs, trying to get a news story. That's the kind of thing that you might put in. And they would be the connotations of that word. You might then go on to talk about what that particular word makes you think, feel and imagine. That's a really good way to talk about effect. So you might say, this makes me think it's a really busy street and that the story's really big. It makes me feel that it's slightly insensitive, that someone's died and they're already there. And it makes me imagine lots of people taking photographs. So if you're unsure about how to talk about effect, how you think and how you feel and how you imagine because of that particular word. So if they'd said cameraman or reporters, I wouldn't feel the same. But there's a certain negativity attached to the word paparazzi, a certain pressure and a certain intensity that comes with the word paparazzi. And you would do that 3 times. If you want to get, well, I imagine everyone wants to get, but if you think that this is something that you could do, get the top band, really you want to start talking about the cumulative effect of language. So, for example, I might talk about paparazzi, and then I might also talk about the verb packed. And about the fact that it again, the verb indicates an intensity, as if there's no room and there's lots of energy there, and lots of pressure and almost excitement and busyness to the situation. And then if you really, really wanted to go for it, you might talk about the sound of the P's, the alliteration. Now, only talk about alliteration if you're going to talk about the effect. So don't say they've used alliteration to make it more memorable, because that doesn't mean anything. You need to say, look, they've used alliteration of the P's, and that sounds harsh and aggressive, and that in itself reflects the idea of the overwhelmingness and the slight negative connotations we get from paparazzi. So you would do that 3 times. The people who are aiming, I guess, for level 3 in this, you literally would need to just pick yourself 3 different quotes, 3 bits of subject terminology, and ideally they'd be different. So a noun, an adjective, and a verb, or a simile and a metaphor and a verb, whatever. And just do the connotations and what it makes you think, feel, and imagine. If you are aiming for the higher level, the level 4, so 7 or 8 out of 8 in this question, so it's worth 8 marks, you ideally would talk about the cumulative effect of language, and that will be just by saying this word choice has these connotations coupled with this word choice, where this creates an overall image of, so it's useful for you to write overall image or overall atmosphere, and that can be a nice phrase to use. That's it for question 2. So question 3. Question 3 says it's a structure question. It actually has a very similar mark scheme to the language question, because it's still an AO2 question. So you still get marks for subject terminology, you still get marks for textual detail, you still get marks for effect. The way that most students mess up this question is that they don't actually talk about the effect of the structure. So they might describe the structure, they might talk about a deductive description, zooming in on a particular character, and then give a quote about that character, but then they don't really explain why that character's been foregrounded, what effect that has. So they were foregrounded first, that makes us think blah, 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 blah. So let's read the question. You now need to think about the whole of the source. So just for those people who are joining, I can see some people joining in. If you don't have the extract, you need to get it from my Twitter page, which is the same username as this, Lindsay J. Skinner, and you can just download it from there. I've tweeted it out from it's a Dropbox link. So the question 3, you now need to think about the whole of the source. This text is from the opening of the novel. How has the writer structured the text to interest you as a reader? You could write about what the writer focuses your attention on at the beginning, how and why the writer changes this focus as the source develops, any other structural features that interest you. Now, what I would say about this is that this is one of the few questions where I would say the bullet points are actually really useful. So, ideally, you would begin with an overview of the whole text. So this is where it's going to be useful that we wrote notes in the margin when we were first reading it. So, firstly, we know that there is quite a prolonged description overall of a crime scene in a street, and there is a tent, and there is a sense of waiting to find out what's happening. So what we would say is, overall, the narrative introduces or uses exposition to describe the setting of a crime scene with a tent and with lots of paparazzi. and we are aware that a death has happened, but we know very few details. Towards the end of the piece, we learn some details through the use of speech, and then we there's a change of focus, and we look at the body, and the tone of the piece changes. And I think it is important to note in that opening bit what the focus is. So you do an overview of the text, what the focus is, and the overview of the feeling or the tone as well. So don't just say what happens, like the tone of what happens. So there's quite a lively, almost trivial, almost, I don't know, like it's a busy event feeling at the start of the text, with people stamping and drinking their coffee and taking photographs. And then it moves into it's broken by the speech, and then we get a much more serious feeling when we get the description of the body, and you become really aware that a human being has died here. So first thing you want to do with the structure is just an overview of what happens and the tone, really. It's useful to link it in with the tone rather than just saying what happens. Then your first paragraph is exactly what they get you to focus on at the start, and that's what the bullet point says, what the writer focuses your attention on at the beginning. So what the writer focuses our attention on at the beginning is the busyness of the street. So what is Galbraith trying to say about the busyness of the street, and why does that come before the body bit? So I guess it is because the writer is foregrounding the street, and one is setting the scene, fine, but you need to talk about the effect of that. So we get a sense of a busyness, an almost excitement. It's cold, but what's important really is that we get this sense of busyness. It's humming, it feels alive, and obviously that massively juxtaposes with the last line of the paragraph, which is and the balcony on the top floor from which the body had fallen. So we get this juxtapose. So at the beginning, the writer focuses our attention on the scene, and then almost makes the scene seem perverse by the fact that it's busy and alive and humming and almost excited, despite the fact that a body has fallen that evening in that same place. Then, and so literally all you do is you'd give an example. So I might say, I might use the very short quote, use short quotations because it's a waste of your time to write long ones. So I would start and I would say, the writer at the beginning focuses our attention on the street and makes it seem alive and exciting, describing it as humming. The reason that they establish this is because they want to emphasise the fact that the response to this person's death is excitement rather than the more morose tone we might expect. This is then emphasised by the juxtapose and the change of focus by the mention of the body. Then we move on, and so we just talk about the effect. So this makes me think, this makes me feel, this makes me imagine. So this makes me think that perhaps the crowd is a bit unpleasant. It makes me briefly imagine the body, and I feel a discomfort about the fact that there's so many people there and there's excitement, even though a body's fallen. So when you're looking at question 3, it's really the focus on structure. So why is it in that order? Why is it that first? Or why do they change this? Why do they change the focus? And then what it makes you think, what it makes you feel, and what it makes you imagine, which is essentially the effect. So the next thing that you need to do is look at a change of focus. I think the most obvious change of focus is when the writer then flips to the body. So the whole thing, the vast majority of the text is just describing the scene. And then we get a flip, a change of focus to a deductive description of the body, which is done in quite a lot of detail, in a way that none of the other characters have been described in detail. Now that's important, and it's important that it came after, and the reason it's important that it came after all the other stuff is because you've got lost in this trivial excitement. You also want to know all about the body. And then what the writer does is they make the description of the body really quite serious and sad, the idea that it almost looks like she's breathing still, and the image of her bleeding into the snow. And that contrast creates quite an impact. It makes us feel a bit overwhelmed. it makes us feel very serious about the death, rather than all these people outside who are quite excited. And so it's deliberate that before we get all the excitement and then after we get the seriousness, because that emphasises the seriousness, because before we had all the excitement. So again, that is you talking about the effect. It emphasises the seriousness. It makes us feel particularly bad because we've been swept up at being curious, and then when we actually find out, it's really unpleasant. And then you would just talk about any other structural feature that interests you. So that can be the tense. So it's the past tense, you might talk about that. You might talk about the paragraphs, you might talk about the use of speech. You can talk about any of them. So, I don't know, a particular thing. What would I want to talk about in this particular one? I probably would talk about it being in the third person, because there's a sense of being detached. So if you talk about personal tense, that's also a structural feature. So I would probably talk about the fact that it's in the third person, and that makes me feel a little bit like I'm watching it unravel, and that I have no ability to change. I don't feel like I'm part of the scene. I feel like I'm watching it unravel. And of course, that's what everybody else is doing. And that can be quite a nice link to make. Okay, so that would be your structure question. So important. Number one, that you give an overview. Number two, that you focus on how it begins, what they focus on, quote, you must quote, and then the effect, what it makes you think, feel, and imagine. Why do they start with that? Why is it important that you focus on that at the beginning? Then a change of focus, and that can be any change of focus. It doesn't have to be the first one. And again, why it's important that it's positioned there, what came before it, what came after it, and why does it matter that it's there? What does that make you think, feel, and imagine? And then finally, any other feature. That could be listing, it could be juxtaposing, could be a deductive or an inductive description, it could be a person, it could be tense, any of those things. Okay, that's the end. The more able student will repeatedly link back to the relevance of the text as a whole and how that affects the text as a whole, why it's structured that way. Question 4. Question 4 is worth 20 marks. I recommend that you spend about 25 minutes on it, more if you get the time, but I don't know how you're going to get the time, because you only want to spend, you're going to be spending 12 to 15 minutes on the 8 markers. So if you can spend 30 minutes on it, that would be amazing. But I tell my students to aim for 4 paragraphs. I think it's quite common, or more common, that people write 3. But you'd want about a page and a half. So you're going to spend 25 minutes or so on this question. And the question is, focus this part of your answer on paragraph 3 and below. So again, you would be given a line reference. It is absolutely vital that you don't write about the stuff that isn't in the lines. So if they say from line 16 onwards, draw a line across your text and then work down from there. So in this one, I need you to find paragraph 3, focus on paragraph 3 and below. So you can include paragraph 3. So go 1, 2, draw a line, it's paragraph 3 and below. A student, having read this section of a text, said, this part of the text presents the people in the street as having a good time. This contrasts with the very depressing description of the body. In your response, you could consider your own impressions of the people in the street. Evaluate how the writer contrasts the description with the description of the body, their description with the description of the body, and support your response with references to the text. Okay, so you're going to get marks for 4 things here. Your response to the statement. Your response to the statement is basically you agreeing or disagreeing, or agreeing to some extent and disagreeing to some extent with what's been said. So I do agree that the body description is pretty depressing. I actually find it more than depressing. I find it quite creepy, the idea that this sequin shirt is moving and it looks like she might get up again. I think that's really sinister. Do I agree that they look like they're having a nice time? I'm not convinced. Most of them are there working, actually, because we've got police officers there, you've got cameramen and paparazzi. So I wouldn't say they're having a nice time, but I don't think they seem to be mourning. And so I might talk about that. Like, I don't feel like they're being respectful particularly, but I don't feel like they're having a nice time. I also don't think they're having a nice time because it seems like it's really cold. You know, they're trying to like hold the cups of coffee to keep them warm, and they've got woolly hats on and scarves. So you might, not scarves, gloves. So you might want to talk about that as well. So the first thing that you want to do really in this question is your response to the statement, and that is a plan. Some people don't plan for this question, which I think is dumb. So I really would look at it and just think, do I agree or disagree with any of this stuff? So yeah, absolutely, I agree that it's a depressing description of the body. I also agree that contrasts with what happens earlier. So that's the two things I agree with. What I disagree with is I don't agree really that they're having a nice time, because I think that most of them are working, and actually they list the professions. And number two, I also think that it seems cold, and although there's a sense of busyness, I'm not convinced that that also means happiness. So I might talk about that. They would be my 4 things. You should be bullet pointing down the 4 things. Once you've done that, you want to select your evidence. So you might talk about a whole quote to begin with, and that would be fine, but there would definitely be individual words that you would need to analyse. So you would need to find those in the text, and that is also why it's useful for you to have labelled what happens in each paragraph, because you might be able to find the quotes a bit more easily. So you get marks for the 4 things. That is your response to a statement. That should be explained, fully explained. So don't just say, I agree that the description of the body is depressing. Say why you agree. I agree because it seems like her whole character has been destroyed, and that there's nothing left of her, and yet she was kind of clearly attractive, she was a celebrity, she seemed like she should be having a nice time because she's dressed in sequins, and yet now her face is crushed. Like, that's pretty depressing. What you'll see I did there is that I didn't keep it really brief. Lots of students keep it so brief, it's just like they struggle to get the marks. So some people just say, I agree with the statement that the description of the body is depressing. Not good enough. Well, I mean, you know, it might get you level 1, but it's not good enough to get yourself a good grade. The next level up really is where people say, I agree that the description of the body is depressing because it seems like she was really injured. And that's fine, but really developing it that little bit further, why it makes you think that, why it makes you feel that, and equally putting in a quote to support what you're saying is a good thing to do. Because then once you've done that response to your statement, and make that as long as you can, really, for those of you who studied the AOs for Lit, this is AO1, so it's just basically showing that you understand the question, you understand the text, sorry. Once you've done that, then you need to go in with your language analysis to support. So I'm saying I think the description of the body is depressing, and I might talk about the sequined top. Well, sequined is, because it's describing the top, you'd get away with saying it was an adjective. Equally, you'd get away with saying it's a verb because of the ed construct. Technically, it's a past participle. If you said that, it'd make you sound like a badass. So I would look at the past participle sequined, and I would say what I find depressing about that is that people wear sequined tops when they're excited, when they're going out, when they want to look pretty. There's a sense of party that is attached, and the fact that it is on a dead person is really depressing because of the contrast. So I would probably talk about that. I might even talk about the juxtaposing of the outfit itself, the sequin top, and the glittering or the glittered, with the crushed face. And I would again talk about the past participle crushed. You can talk about structure in this section, and you can talk about language. So you're going to get yourself marks for response to the statement, or response to the statement in the question, and that can be agree, disagree, or both. And you don't get more marks for agreeing or disagreeing or agreeing a bit. So you do whatever you want. Write actually what you think. So response to a statement. Then you want to go in with some kind of quote. They call this writer's methods, but essentially that is anything that the writer does. So that, again, it could be subject terminology, really, and ideally you'd want to use some subject terminology, adjectives, verbs, similes, metaphors, but equally things that are structural or deductive descriptions or anything like that, any sentence types or forms, any punctuation, anything like that you can write about. And then talk about the effects. Again, what it makes you think, what it makes you feel, what it makes you imagine. And to be on the safe side, I really would recommend that you pick an individual word and give the connotations and then how that relates to what you're saying. So why does it make it depressing? Equally, we'll just look at another example from this particular text. They're saying that they seem like they're having a nice time. They seem like they're having fun. What does the question say? They're having a good time. So I would argue that that's not the case because there's a semantic field used by the writer of professions. So they talk about paparazzi, they talk about photographers, they talk about police, they talk about sound men, they talk about reporters. All of those people are there with a role to do. They're there, because there's been an event, they've been instructed to go there. And I associate those things with work and with a job to be done. Semantic field is just a series of words that have a similar connotation. And that semantic field doesn't create a sense of excitement and joy for me. It creates a sense of kind of it being depressing, really, or certainly being an obligation rather than something that's fun. Equally, you might want to talk about the weather. So the fact that they're woolly-hatted, the fact that they're stamping their feet, that they stamped, their feet, that implies that they're really cold. That isn't fun. That's the reading section. That should have taken you about an hour. My students, if you want to submit, I don't know if you can do it on Share My Homework because of the way that I've set it up. If you want to submit an answer to any of those questions and me give you feedback tonight or tomorrow, I will do that. That's fine. You can do that on Share My Homework. Equally, you can email it to me on my school email address and I'll mark it and send it back. Obviously, I've got the work you did today and I'm going to give you the personal targets tomorrow before your exam anyway. Okay, we're going to move on to the writing section. The writing section. Okay, you'll definitely get a choice of two, but you probably will get a narrative, which is a story, you telling a story, and a description to choose from. But you might get two descriptions and you might get two narratives. I think that'd be a real pain in the bum if you get that, but you might. It will read something like this. A magazine has asked for contributions to their creative writing page. Either write a description of a street at night as suggested by this picture, and I've actually got a picture if you haven't, well, you should have the picture, hang on, I'm just going to unplug this. This is the picture, street at night. Notice that it says suggested by. They are not asking you to describe the picture. They don't want you to say, in the picture I can see some lampposts and they're orange. They don't want that. They want a beautiful description, like the sort of thing you'd almost get like in a travel brochure or something. Make it sound beautiful, or like in the middle of a novel when they break into like a cracking bit of description. Hardy does it all the time. I'm not a massive fan, but nevertheless, a beautiful bit of description is what they want. So it's better for you to write a short piece of beautiful description than for you to write 4 pages of it being a bit rubbish, if I'm honest, because they're going to give you marks for craft in it. And then the second one I've got in here is write a story that begins with the sentence, the buzz in the street was like the humming of flies. Obviously, that's been taken from the extract. You probably won't get one that's been taken from the extract, but they might tell you how to start. So they're the questions. I just want to briefly run through the difference between narrate and describe. So, number 1, describe, very little will happen. It's absolutely fine for it to be in the first person or the third person, even, I guess, the second person, but, and it doesn't matter what tense it's in, but nothing should really happen. Nothing should really happen in it. You should be focusing on different areas. So I think the most obvious thing to do is start off with a description of the atmosphere created by the whole image, and then focus on individual parts of the image. So on the image in this particular one, you might talk about the orangey light of the lampposts. You might talk about the sky and the clouds. You might talk about the wet road. You might talk, and the pavement. You might talk about the trees. Ideally, you would do something interesting with your structure. So Obviously, you need to link your paragraphs, fine, but maybe bookending, or maybe a little short paragraph of something that's really profound, some kind of repetition, something that is structurally interesting. And the other thing with a description is, what is the other thing? That you need to link the descriptions together. So you don't say the lampposts were la da 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 da, the road was la da 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 da, the pavement was la da da. You have to link them. So above me, the sky, da 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 da. Beneath my feet, the road, blah blah blah. So each time you link it with a preposition, because otherwise it just feels like it skips from place to place. So you need to link them as to where they are. Yeah, so I mean, there's very little to say about description. What I would say is varying your sentences is a great idea and will get you marks, but don't just vary your sentences because you've been told to start with an adverb and you've been told to start with the participle, ing, or whatever. Like, that's fine, but really you want to think about why you would do that. So if you want to get a sense of lots of things happening all at the same time, use participle phrases like, I don't know, pouring with rain, or no, lashed by rain, tugged by the wind, ripped at by hail or whatever else. The lamppost was ga 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 ga. So you get that sense of lots of things happening all at once. Participles are really useful for that. But you don't just want to use participles just because you've been told to use them. You want to use them for effect. So if you're going to use, for example, a simple sentence, use it for effect. Think about the most jagged, sharp, important little piece and pop a simple sentence in. You could do the same with a fragment. Don't just use alliteration because you've been told to. Think about the sound. If you want to get the sound of wind, use lots of W sounds or lots of S sounds, the sibilants. Like, that is deliberate crafting, and that will get you more marks than just going, oh, I'm going to use a simile, and I'm going to say it howled like a lion. No, they don't howl, do they? It roared like a lion, or it howled like a whatever else howls. Like, you have to do it for effect, because otherwise, basically, you're not going to get great marks. So really think about what you've done. And I would say, and I said this to my students earlier, understatement is better than overstatement. So if you're gonna describe something, you don't have to go in with loads and loads of adjectives or anything like that. What you do need to do is just try to be subtle and really create an image in your reader's head. And just a note on word order. It is worth considering where you put your adjectives. So if you think like I don't know, so like you're describing a character or a person, and you say, I don't know, his wrinkled old skin, frowned at me, or his wrinkled old skin was brown from the sun, whatever. It can be more interesting to vary your sentence structure and to add emphasis to, and sometimes I think it makes it sound more sinister, to a word if you move the adjectives. So his skin, comma, wrinkled and brown, comma, was burned by the never-ending sun, or something like that. The idea that you would move the adjectives is really useful, because students often just say that his wrinkled brown skin, rather than saying brown and wrinkled, comma, his skin, or his skin, comma, brown and wrinkled. So that can be useful when you're doing a description, to just consider those kind of things, the kind of images that you want to create. So the key things for a description: 1, nothing should really happen. 2, do an overall focus from the atmosphere of the picture, zoom in through individual things. It's likely that you will get, the description will be the picture, although it might say, write a description of a beach, in which case you won't have the picture. Pictures doesn't make very little difference, just imagine a beach. All of you have presumably been on a beach. So nothing should really happen. Try to vary your sentence structures, but do that for effect. Consider your vocabulary choices. Try to use devices that are actually effective. Try not to use too many animal similes. And obviously vary your punctuation as well. And then link your ideas with prepositions. So that's, in the sky, under my feet, to the left, or at 7 o'clock, or whatever, just that you link the ideas. With a narrative, it's a little bit different. So you might get to write a whole story. You might also be asked to write sections of a story, so they might get you to focus on just the beginning. It is worth noting that leaving something on a cliffhanger does not make it a full story. So if you're gonna write a story, you need to, actually write a full story with the exposition at the start, some kind of rising action tension into some kind of climax, and then the falling action. With a story, I think the key thing to remember really is that what you need to do is emotionally engage your reader. So I'm examining this year, and my partner's examining this year, and we will read so many stories, and in most of them we won't really care very much about the character. So you need to make us care. So consider what it is that makes your character worth caring about, so that then I'm invested as a reader in their outcome. So it might be that you share their hopes and dreams with me. It might be that you show them being really kind. Whatever it is, you make them vulnerable. But you need to make me care. It is really hard to plan and write a full story in 40 minutes. And what I would say to you is you need to be very, very careful not to try and make it overcomplicated. You need, I would say, about a 5-paragraph plan. 1, give me some exposition about the place or the character. Either, it makes no difference the order you do that in, but I want to know about the character, I want to know about the place. They're probably 2 separate paragraphs. 3, you need to then introduce some kind of problem, whatever it is, because that's the catalyst that. Then do the rising action, the developing tension. Then your climax, where it all goes wrong, or there's a car accident, or somebody's head gets chopped off, or I don't know, they ask her to marry him, whatever it is, Then the falling action and the resolution. So actually that's 6, isn't it? But the point is it needs to be something very simple and short. Don't do the story of the Titanic, unless you just do a really brief person on the boat, clearly the big crash of it hitting, them drowning, or them trying to survive and then them drowning, the end. Don't do the whole story of them getting on and being excited and blah, 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 because you're going to really, really struggle to fit that in, because you haven't got all the time to do that. Again, bookending is nice in this, but the key thing is for you to get me to care about your characters. Make me care about what happens to them. I'm trying to think anything else that I would really say was important. You must paragraph, obviously. So paragraph, again, link with these prepositions. Again, vary your sentence structures, but for effect rather than just because you want to. Vary your punctuation, semicolons, dashes, speech marks if you're going to include speech. I would recommend, if you're planning to do a narrative, that you just Google punctuating speech. It's really common for students to punctuate speech incorrectly, so I would recommend you Google that. Some people are saying, oh, my teacher says only do the description. Oh, my teacher says only do the story. That's fine if there's a choice. There might not, there'll be a choice of question, but they might both be describe and they might both be a story. So we just need to be a little bit careful about that. The other thing is, the final thing is that you might get a question that tells you to do a description, but then when you look at it, it kind of is leading you to do a narrative. And it will be something like, describe a time when you were really nervous. And what will end up happening is you will tell a story if you're not careful. So you really need to be careful in that. So when you do that, if you pick to do that kind of thing, which is a description, so you'd go, describe a time when you were nervous, you need to think, right, where was I? It could be made up, of course. Ideally, it would be made up, because otherwise you're going to read a gazillion things about students being nervous about exams or blah. So you want to describe the setting. You want to describe the thought process. You want to describe any people that are there, what the weather is like, what the room is like. What you don't want to do is lots of things to happen. And it's really, so it might be before you step on stage, or it might be, I don't know, before or after a terrorist attack, or before or after going over the top, or before or after, I don't know, a spaceship going, you're going to the moon, or whatever it is you're doing in your story. I think that what's important is that you specifically focus on the fact that it's a description. So if it says description, you need to not focus on events. You need to focus on describing what can be seen and felt and heard, not on events happening, and that is important. So if my students want to write them any of those answers from the paper, knock yourself out and send it to me, and I will get that sorted out. Is there anything else I needed to say? I don't think there is. If you're stuck, tweet me the questions. I don't access this thread of questions or comments afterwards for obvious reasons. So if you want to look, you've got any questions, just tweet me and I will reply. I've done all of the questions on here, so you'll be able to re-watch this afterwards if you need to, and you'll be able to get the paper on the link. Thanks very much. Have a nice evening and good luck to everyone for tomorrow.